Welcome to the Personal Development Mastery Podcast. I am Agi Keramidas and my mission is to inspire you to rise up, grow, stand out and take action towards the next level of your life. I am interviewing leaders, influencers, entrepreneurs, authors, exceptional people who can and will inspire you to improve your life. Tune in for 2 episodes each week, every Monday and Thursday. In today's show, I am delighted to speak with Garry Turner. Garry, you have over 20 years of experience in international sales, business development, and relationship building. Combining this powerful mix of skills, you facilitate individual and team transformations as an interpersonal catalyst. You are also a fellow podcaster, the creator and host of the Value Through Vulnerability podcast. And whatever you do is driven by your 2 non-negotiable core values of growth and connection. Garry, welcome to Personal Development Mastery. It is my real pleasure to be speaking with you today.
Oh, the pleasure's all mine, Agi. Thanks so much for the invitation.
Awesome. Garry, I will start with your incredible journey of self-discovery, which you describe you had over the last few years. So can you give me a key defining moment in this journey?
There's been a number of key defining moments, I would say, to be honest. But I think one of the key moments was around 5 years ago, age 39. Which is really interesting because I listened to your conversation with Emma around the over 40s support that she offers. So for me, age 39, I sat in my apartment where I'm sitting right now, and I had the 6-figure salary, the nice job, the job title, the nice house, the holidays, the happy family life, everything that we're socialized to believe matters. And I felt hollow. I felt completely empty on the inside. And at the time, I potentially would have thought that was a midlife crisis, Agi. But actually what I realized is actually a midlife awakening. It was an awakening to, oh my God, I could be so much more than just the person chasing money, material items, and things outside of me. So then I started getting curious.
So when you say you started getting curious, what steps did you take as a result of this curiosity?
So for me, what it involved was actually really looking inside myself for the first time in 39 years. And what do I mean by that? I mean that I really started asking myself, what do I care about? What do I believe in? What do I get excited by? For the first 39 years, Agi, I had a very good life, very grateful, very privileged, but it was without real meaning, without real purpose. So what that led me to then, the next 2 years, I got heavily involved in learning and development, organizational design, so really down the sort of HR people track. And I did that for the next 2 years to very, very good success. But then I hit another wall, interestingly, and that wall was more or less burning myself out. So I'd done all of this work, made a really big impact in my work organization, in fact, where I still work today, full time. But I overthought my way into a burnout over a 6-month period. So I had this midlife awakening, 2 years of really high growth, high intensity curiosity, and then I hit a wall again. And then there's something else. That was another, let's say, another junction that I then moved forward from.
In many ways, I can relate to what you're saying about the journey of growth and self-exploration and overthinking, because I think inevitably when you come across this new information and about yourself as well, but in general about human behavior and what drives us and all these things, you will think it, maybe you will overthink it. So I want you to tell me about this second barrier that you overcome. Describe that to me.
No, sure. So what happened back then, I need to go back to come forward, Agi, if I may.
Of course.
So age 12, 13, I was actually psychologically bullied and physically bullied for 2 years, age 12, 13, so repeatedly by a gang of white boys. And what I didn't realize back then, this is back in the 80s, is that those boys, or particularly the one ringleader, the leader of the bullies, he was hurting. But I only know that now with the maturity that I have today to know that he had some issues.
Mm-hmm.
But what I did, you see, is I held on to that emotion from the age 12, 13, because I didn't know, I did not have the experience, the knowledge, the understanding to feel and process emotion. So I held on to it in my head. So what happened, leap forward to age 41, into that high growth part of my journey, and I was being bullied again, but in the workplace. So not physically, but passive aggressive behavior, blind copies on emails where the emails being sent to senior leaders say, hey, look what Gary's doing. It's not his job to be saying X, Y, or Z. So it's just some really passive aggressive behavior. Mm-hmm. And I built up the courage, Aggie, to challenge this within the workplace, which took quite a lot of energy for me as someone that had been bullied and was still holding on to that from being a child. So I plucked up the courage, had a word with my line manager at that time. Mm-hmm. And he said to me, Gary, that line manager's got something going on at home. Please leave it. So rather than hearing the message, rather than seeing me, he saw right through me. Mm-hmm. And that started me on a journey of progressive overthinking over the next 6 months till I went bang. And I think what I just want to hold here is it's really important, I feel, and I'd love to get your thoughts on this, Aggie, that at the time I thought he caused me to start to burn out. But of course, what I realized over the next couple of years is that I did it to myself. Yes, there was a trigger. That behavior was not acceptable, but it's the stories I told me internally that led me to burn out. It wasn't that person that caused me to burn out.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. No one can make us do anything or feel in a certain way. No one has that power. It is only ourselves that have that power, which many times, unfortunately, we willingly give that power to other people. But I like very much the concept that the Stoic philosophers were using of the inner citadel, that which is our thoughts and the way that we think. No one else can penetrate that. It's like a fortress, but we can open it and let the enemies, in a loose sense of the word, go in. And so I think, it's and unfortunately we do it often. We can blame other people for how we feel or how we behave, but in the very end, it's only us that, and the moment that we take full responsibility of what we do and how we feel, that empowers us. Otherwise, we're just weak, and it's easy to give others the responsibility and the blame. You asked me for my thoughts on this, so I think it's. And Gary, I want to ask one more thing with your story and your journey that is more or specifically related to finding your purpose. Can you give me a moment, like maybe a light bulb or whatever else comes to mind?
It's a really interesting question, Aggie, because my purpose is continuously shifting, and it has been for the last 3 years. Mm-hmm. So one moment I think I'm going down the HR track, mm-hmm. Then I think I'm going to set up my own business, then I want to be the person that changes an organization from the inside out. Mm-hmm. So the direction of travel, the purpose of what I'm doing does shift quite often, but the backbone, or let's say the golden thread behind everything that I do, and I'm only realizing it right now, actually, this is a great conversation, is it's helping other human beings role model vulnerability and inclusion. So my work between now and the time I leave the planet is helping individuals, particularly men that look like you and I, develop the skills and the behaviors to feel and sit in vulnerability and inclusion more often, so that they then invite others to do the same.
When you say looking like you and I, do you refer to the hair, don't you?
both the hair and the skin hue color that you and I share, because because one of the things I'm realizing, and again, I love your thoughts here, Aggie, is the lived experience that we all have, of course, is our own experience, as you've spoken to so beautifully. But what I'm realizing very recently since the tragic murder of George Floyd is, so you have a lived experience, but then there is some very real systemic challenges that different people face that you and I don't. And having to piece together actually the lived experience that we all have, which is unique, with the very real barriers that some other people face, that's part of the work. And that's why I really believe passionately around focusing on helping leaders be more vulnerable and help leaders be inclusive by design. Because the more we do that, the more we take down those systemic challenges and allow everybody to live a pure human experience, as we should all be here to do.
Mm-hmm. Garry, talk to me a bit more about vulnerability and inclusion. So can you clarify these terms for me? How do you mean vulnerability? How do you mean inclusion?
So for me, if I start with vulnerability, so for me, I believe personally, and from my own lived experience, that vulnerability is a gateway behavior. Mm-hmm. And what I mean by gateway behavior is every single time I share my story like I'm sharing with you, other people, imagine that we're like a flower. And a lot of society, if we don't have the awareness that you have or that I'm now getting, that our experience is internal out. Yeah, that it is about our mindset, it is about our values, it is about our beliefs. If we go through our lives believing that the outside world causes us to do X, Y, and Z, we're like a closed flower. And that's where a lot of people are. It's where I was. And I believe that vulnerability, by you role modeling vulnerability, by me sharing more of my story, it helps others open up like the beautiful flower that they are from this closed, gripped flower of fear and anxiety and worry and victim. And I believe the more of us that can show more of our true selves, so sharing a bit more of our true story by not worrying to have all the answers, by saying I don't know more often, that's vulnerability. Is truly showing up fully as a human being without needing everything being polished and perfect and correct. And the more we role model that, the more other people feel that they can also role model that as well. So that's the vulnerability piece, Aggie, for me.
Just writing that was so beautifully said, that truly showing up as human being without the need for being polished. Tell me about inclusion as well. How do you mean that?
So it's funny, I wrote about this quite recently in that, so if I can state, I'm going to use the title of a piece I wrote on the Biz Catalyst platform recently. So inclusion is innate, exclusion is a choice. So we all come into this world included. Not one person is born and is not included in society. We learn how to exclude, consciously or unconsciously. So my belief is that the more we can become conscious of whether we are including or excluding people, this allows, again, other people to live a fuller version of themselves. So to give you an example, if I don't include myself in a conversation or show up fully and be courageous, or if I don't include myself in a challenging conversation at work, if I'm not including myself, the paradox is I'm excluding myself. So it's really trying to keep your vibration of awareness really, really high and intentionally being aware of the points when you want to be included in something and when you decide to step out of it. But I really believe that we all come into this world included, but we choose to exclude. But we do that quite innocently sometimes, whether it be through a recruitment practice or through bias, or maybe you want to set boundaries to make sure someone is excluded because they're, the way they behave, or maybe they're aggressive. So it's just being mindful that I believe that our default as human beings is to be inclusive. But when we're being exclusive, it should be on a conscious, healthy boundary setting basis and not on a power over basis. And I think it's very important that we're aware of when we're being inclusive and exclusive and why we're being that. And I think there's a really close interplay for me, Aggie, between vulnerability and inclusion. And I believe the more we role model both and the more we're conscious of both, the more we create the workplaces and society that genuinely allows everybody to thrive.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. No, I understand that. It makes sense, and it's very, very well put the way that you describe inclusion and exclusion when it is consciously chosen. There is one other thing, Garry, I wanted to ask your explanation. I was reading in your, your website that you are an interpersonal catalyst. It's a very fascinating topic, and I think I have an idea of what you mean by that, but I want your interpretation.
So I'm conscious of labels, Aggie.
So am I.
It's one that was, so I had some brilliant coaching. I don't know if you've come across Nilla for Merchant's work, Aggie, before.
No.
She's written a book called Onlyness, which is incredible. Mm-hmm. And I had some coaching with her previously. And what she helped me see at the end of last year was that my gift, the spot in the world where only I stand, which is a combination of everything. So the dark, the light, the good, the bad, the life's journey. Like, we are all whole human beings, but we don't always show up as whole human beings because we hide the pain, or we hide the negativity, or we hide that difficult story that we had to deal with. But when we show up fully embracing every bit of us, that's in essence what she speaks to as being our onlyness. And my onlyness is as an interpersonal catalyst. An interpersonal catalyst is my gift through vulnerability and inclusion is to bring people together, either one-to-one or in teams, and help them co-create what good looks like. So I'm not there to teach or preach. I'm there to hold space. And with my gifts of this international sales experience and understanding people intimately, I bring together people virtually or in person to learn about each other, to connect on a human level, but also with my commerciality to help join the dots between what works and what does not work within a work culture. Mm-hmm. Because every one of us has already got the answers, but so often we hide them away behind fear or anxiety, or I don't think I'm good enough. So my role is to hold space and be the person that catalyzes that safe environment. Mm-hmm. Whether it be teams, whether it be in leaders, whether it be within organizations. And that's my gift, is because I see and sense systemically, and I've got the understanding from international experience and through understanding people and culture to really join the dots in a very fast way. So if I give you one example, if I may, Aggie, I worked with a team at the end of last year, 29 people, two international sales teams from all across Europe. Mm-hmm. And within just 6 hours, that team hacked 502 data points and co-created 40 ideas how they could work together better in less than 6 hours. They had the answers. What they didn't have was the time. They didn't give themselves permission to slow down. Mm-hmm. They didn't give themselves permission to believe they had good ideas. Mm-hmm. And all I did was hold space and use my understanding of the world to join the dots for them. They had the answers. So that's what it means to be an interpersonal catalyst for me.
That's very powerful. And I shared, I'm going to share what we briefly discussed before we started recording, that even, and I think that is indeed your a competency, a superpower, if you wish, that you have, because looking at some of the things, when I was looking at some of the things in your website, it gave me some inspired ideas of things that I can do. So I think you can facilitate that to others. It's very impressive. And even more so, I think it is when you actually recognize that this is my duty, my purpose, who I am, or even the phrase that you used earlier, which we have to define ourselves as something. It's just words, but yeah, it helps by saying, giving a description. Gary, I want to, you mentioned your coach and I want to ask about your experience being coached. It is my understanding that you only discovered coaching and have started being coached only the last few years, and it has made a big shift in your life. So, can you tell me a bit about this, please?
Yeah, absolutely. The first thing I would say for your audience is, for many years, and it was only in February 2018 that I first had a real coaching experience. So literally 2.5 years ago, Aggie, as recent as that.
Yeah.
And the first coach I had was a lovely lady called Kelly Swingler. And what she did, she was the one that really helped me join the dots on the emotional suppression. So what she did, she took me through a timeline. So what are the peaks of your life and what have been the troughs of your life? And as we went through all of that experience of my first, what was then 42 years on the planet, that's when I had that eureka moment of, oh my God, I've been doing it to myself. Yeah. So that was one coaching experience. The other one I spoke about, Nilofer Merchant. Like, the really key message I want to get through to your audience is, you are good enough, invest in yourself. Like, it doesn't have to be huge amounts of money, but find someone. Like, we get in our own way so often. I did for so long, and it's very innocent. There's no judgment in that. But my experience of coaching has been transformational, and it's been transformational because people holding space for me to hear myself, to join the dots, to experience the good, bad, and indifference of my life so far. So that's why I think coaching truly is an incredible gift that great people like you offer to the world. And we're worthy of it, Aggie. And I think this is the big mindset block, is we feel it's quite indulgent to spend money on ourselves around something like coaching. You know, that's, and I've seen that you as part of the Tony Robbins crew in the past. We look at Tony Robbins online and go, that's for Tony Robbins and his fans. It's not for me. Like, I'm just Gary, who's doing a full-time job. Every single one of us is worthy of living the best possible life. And I believe if any of us go through life without a coach, we can't say we've lived that best possible life. I genuinely believe that.
Agree so much because for me also, it's not many years since I had my first coaching experience. Probably was 1 year before you, so it's recent for me too. And the fear or the reluctancy that many people have to invest in themselves is really one of the things that hold them back the most, because what is there else to invest on apart from yourself? It's the only investment that really makes sense. Anything else, you never know what might happen to it. Any other kind of investment, it might collapse, or there might be a market crash, or whatever it is. But yourself, you are the only thing that, or the first thing really, that makes sense to invest on, because everything else is dependent on you. And the more you grow and become a better version of yourself, the more you can do everything else better. So yeah, fully agree.
If I may, I love that. I've never heard that description. Actually, it's beautiful what you've just described, because it's really powerful, Aggie. Actually, because if we think about assets, and assets in the financial world, they appreciate in value or they depreciate in value. And the only thing that people think might go up in value is property. So they chuck all of their money into property or into maybe some shares. But those things will never, ever give you the enrichment of your soul other than what you just spoke to brilliantly, which is investing in yourself. It's the best investment. And I'd never thought of it that way before, so thank you. Very, very powerful.
Thank you. I think it is Warren Buffett that said that, so I won't take credit for this, but yeah, it is or Steve Covey, the most important investment we made. I want to carry on a little bit with the coaching thing, and I want to ask you about something that you said, that the realizations that you came by after having been coached and investing in yourself financially, emotionally, time-wise, and that realization that was that really the only thing that holds us back is the thoughts we have and the stories we tell to ourselves. So do you want to talk to me about this?
Oh, how long have we got left? That's a big old topic, Aggie. That's a big old topic. But what I'll do though, I'll link the two actually, the two parts, so coaching, but also my experience of what seems a big breakthrough, but it's quite an obvious one. So again, another coach that I worked with so I had the first coaching experience February 2018 with Kelly. August 2018, I had another experience with a wonderful guy called Piers Thurston, and he does a lot of work around what's called the three principles, so mind, conscious, and thought, which I think you speak to, and we're speaking to a lot more. And what happened during that coaching experience? That was a 3-day retreat over in Berkshire in the UK. Mm-hmm. On day 2 of this retreat, Aggie, so I was sitting there, beautiful countryside, no alcohol. Just beautiful sunshine, looking up at the trees, just going, okay, this is good, it's interesting, mind, consciousness, thought, okay, whatever. Yeah, I can see there's something in it. And I just had this boom moment. And that boom moment on day 2 was I just sat there on this pub bench on my own, just thinking, I just went, oh my God, I burnt myself out. It wasn't that line manager. Mm-hmm. I overthought my way into that. Mm-hmm. And that was just a beautiful experience and a brilliant example of, before that moment, the story I told myself was, that boss told me to go away. I'm being bullied again. I need to leave this organization. Why doesn't somebody see me? Like all that negative self-talk was going on. And that day, and since that day, Aggie, I've been free of that story. Mm. And I want to emphasize the word for your audience, free. I have not once sat back in with that story, not once. But that came because A, I was with a coach, and B, I gave myself permission to invest in myself, and C, I took the time to invest in myself. And that's one of probably the most powerful examples, to be honest, that I've experienced so far. And I keep coming back to that because I could almost look at my journey the last 3 years in particular, and I see the sort of, almost like the catalyst coaching in February 2018. The aperture, the heart was open, the mind was open, I was curious. And then I was ready for this next level up experience, which I had in August. And now it's almost like, I talk a lot about exponential humanity, Aggie. Like we talk about Moore's law, we talk about technology. We've been holding ourselves back for so long as humanity behind our stories and our fear. Mm-hmm. Like we're just about on the tip, if we allow ourselves, for humanity to go exponential. Mm-hmm. That's what this conversation's about. It's what the work is that you're doing. It's the stuff I'm trying to do in the world. Like we are on the edge of humanity going exponential. The only thing that will stop that is if we carry on being stuck in our heads and believe that we need power over and not power with.
I like very much what you just said about the exponential growth of humanity. The technology has risen exponentially over the last few decades. So it's mind-blowing what's happening and what's about to happen as well. I will ask you something that just came to mind, and it involves, that metaphor of all of us being in the matrix, or maybe not all of us, but the vast majority of us being in the matrix. And that came to me because of what you just said about the exponential growth of humanity, which obviously some people need to get out of the matrix, because as long as you are stuck in there, you can't have that growth. So the problem is, when you are in the matrix, you don't know you are in the matrix. How can you get out of it? What is because once once you have a peek outside, and it's tempting now to start talking about the blue pill metaphor and all the red pill metaphor and these things. But tell me your thought. How can someone get out of it when when they don't even know they are in it?
Well, I've got this whole energetic reaction to what you've just asked me the question around, and I tell you why. There's two things. One, have you seen The Social Dilemma yet on
Yes,
Netflix?
I have. Yes.
Yeah, I watched it last
couple of days ago. Yeah, yes.
Yeah, so I watched it last night.
Okay.
Literally. And my goodness, we are all in the Matrix. Well, as you say, we don't even realize. So my invitation to all of us, and this is to me as well ongoing, it is about staying conscious. Of course, consciousness is the same as awareness. My invitation is to get out of whatever your bubble is right now, whether it's being a wonderful parent, whether it's leading a social group, whether it's being the CEO of an organization, whatever your version of normal is, please step outside of it right now. Like, who doesn't look like you? Who doesn't sound like you? Who's saying something that is challenging your thinking? Like, go towards more of that more often, because that will keep you out of your version of the Matrix. And I think, and it does speak directly to, it's going to take vulnerability to do that, because you're going to be stepping into a space of unknown. But it does mean you will end up being more inclusive as a result of other ideas that you don't like the sound of, people that don't look and sound like you. So, and again, it does come back to role modeling vulnerability and inclusion for me, Aggie. If you can keep trying to role model vulnerability, keep trying to be inclusive and exclude those that are harming you, and you will be able to step outside of the Matrix. I genuinely believe vulnerability and inclusion, role modeled consciously, will help you live a fuller, conscious life outside of the Matrix.
Thank you. That's great. And because you mentioned the social dilemma, which I think it is imperative for people to watch, because it's going to give them an awareness that probably weren't. I didn't know of that either. I had a clue, an idea, but the depth of information and revelations in there for me was, and it ties into what you just said, to look at people who have different points of view or look different. The thing with social media and the internet, Google, is that and that is my conclusion, or one of the conclusions from the social dilemma, was that we're given much more information like the one that we are expecting to see. So our confirmation bias, if you want, we're looking at more and more things that we will agree with. So our bias, whatever it is just reinforced, and we really believe that the world is exactly the way that we think we are. So if we're into, for example, conspiracy theories, we will find more and more of that ad infinitum. Or if we are on a different path, we will see more of that. So it's a dangerous trap, and there is not one truth. There are many out there. Certainly ours is not the best one, for sure. It's very arrogant to believe that we know what is the truth in the world. So yeah, this is my thoughts on social dilemma, since you mentioned it. It's fantastic. I would like also, Garry, to ask you about your podcast. So it's called Value Through Vulnerability, and I read your description here. It's dedicated to helping put the human back into humanity, with a particular focus on inclusion and improving voice for all. I'm shortening it a little bit. So tell me about your podcast. Why did you start it, and any major learnings that you've had as Garry from being a podcaster these years?
Yeah, so thank you for the question. So I started Value Through Vulnerability back in May 2018. And the reason I actually started it as part of this journey that I was on, and it's interesting when you think May, so that was 3 months after that first experience of coaching. So I suddenly had this idea of, hey, I'm now like full Garry can do other things and not just be corporate Garry. So one of those things was to set up the podcast. And the reason I set it up was because I was looking for the content, Aggie, around being more human. So, and I didn't know what that meant. I just know that I wanted to find more deeper conversations and not all of the surface level BS. I won't swear because I don't want you to have to put an E on this conversation. But but you know, there was so much stuff out there at the time, and I still believe there today, which is very much about, you know, get rich in 20 minutes. Here's your silver bullet. Change life in like a nanosecond. Like, it's just not realistic. Like, what I was looking for is like, how do we connect better as humans? Like, what's it going to take for me to show up more fully and get the best out of my life, and me help others do the same? And because I couldn't find the content, I decided to create it. So I had a very kind colleague and good friend of mine, Helen Amory, who was my, you know, I'm sure with you, finding that first guest, you're like, oh my God, who's going to have the courage to be on like episode number 1? So I was very grateful that Helen was my first guest back in May 2018. And what I found, to answer your question about learning, is I'm now up to, we released episode 136. We're 2.5 years in as of yesterday, as we record. And what I've learned the most is how similar we all are, regardless of the color of our skin, the religion we might follow, where we live in the world. My goodness, Aggie, like, we are so much more similar than we are different. Like, and I'm not saying that as some grandiose comment. Like, I've heard it conversation after conversation after conversation. Like, when we talk about awareness, we're on about human awareness. When we talk about vulnerability, we're talking about human vulnerability. Like, all of these conversations are before we layer up black, white, disabled, you know, however someone identifies, you know, I'm Aborigine, whatever. Before those labels, as you say, which we need to identify, it makes sense of the world. But before all of that, we are all equally human. We genuinely are. The whole point of this podcast is to help people give themselves permission to sit in that space more often. Because when we realize that we are all equally human, we tend to think, I feel, more critically, more empathetically, and more caringly about one another. And that's certainly what I've learned throughout. That's probably my number one learning across 2.5 years, is we are far more similar than we are different.
Thank you. There was one thing that came to mind, and looking at your virtual background with the waves you have behind you, is that we are, as humans, we are similar to the waves. Excuse me. So we are all waves, but we can't exist without the sea, and we're all connected through the sea, but we can't see that there is the sea. So a wave looks at the other waves and believes it is something separate from them, but we are all so similar. We're the same thing. We're part of the sea. It's just a metaphor that came to me looking at your background and hearing you said what you said about how similar or how the same, or dare I say one, we all are.
We absolutely are. But what I'd like to just add as a caveat to that, I agree with you. We are one human race. We're not 4, 5, 6, or 20. But although we are all one, we all have a different lived experience. And it's understanding one another's lived experience that is the gold dust. So with being a black male, for example, brings a different lived experience to me as a white male. So although we are all one, we have to appreciate the lived experience that we each have. And that's the work. That's the value add, I think, of us as this one human race, is understanding and appreciating one another's experience.
100%. Thank you. This is it's very fascinating conversation, and there are many things that I would ask you about, but I know that we are there is a time limit to this conversation, so I'm going to try and move it a little bit. I want to ask one more thing about your podcast. You say that it little did you know at that time that it would be one of your energy source for you that has led you to, your change over the the following up years. So tell me one more thing that comes to your mind about how your being a podcast has helped you.
Yeah, the other great thing I would say is it's literally like having one-to-one coaching. It's literally like having a one-to-one coach, but with a different coach every week. Because what you're doing is you're sharing your experience of life in an open, flowing dialogue. And it's a gift, Aggie. It's an absolute gift. You're giving me the gift today. And, I've been giving the gift every week for the last 2.5 years to another human being to share their story, their journey. But it's not altruistic. Like, I learn it's not just altruistic. Like, it is for them. But it's also, I get so much, I'm sure you do. And what I've realized, to really answer your question fully, there's an unconscious element where I know regularly, Aggie, like I'll be 3 months down the road and I'll be forming some ideas or reinforcing a point or sharing a story. And the previous podcast from 3 months ago has definitely fed into that story, because podcasting is like a beautiful storytelling journey where I've now got 136 human beings. All of their stories, consciously and unconsciously, have weaved into part of who I am today. Again, we're all one, we're all connected, but I genuinely feel that like I am who I am today, in part due to investing in coaching, in part because of family and friends, etc., but in a major way because of the amazing human beings I've met on the podcasting journey. Like, why would I speak to CEOs of organizations otherwise? Why would I speak to independent coaches? Why would I speak to senior leaders in businesses? Why would I speak to diversity and inclusion consultants? That was not what I was doing in April 2020. How about you?
You see me smiling all along and nodding, because I completely agree with you. And what you said about altruistic versus selfish, you didn't say the word selfish, I'm saying it, that podcasting and doing these kinds of interviews is a win-win, actually a win-win-win for everyone. It's a win for my guests because they have a platform to share their story, their opinions, share their business. It's a win for the listener who wants to learn and grow and get inspired to take some action. And certainly it is a win for me because I learn firsthand, and I get to actually ask the people that I interview whatever it is that I want to know, first of all. So it's a very privileged position to be in. Thank you for this comment on doing one-to-one coaching with a different person every week. I had never thought of it as such, but it is true. So it's brilliant. Thank you. Garry, let me ask you also some quick-fire questions to end up this episode, okay? So first one, I always ask, what does personal development mean to you?
Becoming a whole human being.
And if you could go back in time and meet your 18-year-old self, Garry, what's the one piece of advice you would give him?
Great question. And I would give my 18-year-old self the advice, two things very quickly.
Sure.
One, you are enough. You are enough. You don't need anything to validate who and what you are. Secondly, feel emotion. Good, bad, negative, positive. It's just a data point of your experience in that moment. It doesn't mean anything.
Yeah. Thank you. Tell me, if you had a magic wand and you could change something in the world as it is today, what would you change?
I would change the rampant inequity of our systems, i.e. I would redesign society, financial system, education from the bottom up, so that it was genuinely inclusive for everybody.
That's amazing. Thank you. Do you want to share with us a major breakthrough or aha moment you had recently?
It was on this podcast earlier on.
I feel privileged to hear that.
But really, I loved that. I just really loved that point about you really helped hold up the mirror to that point about investment and the appreciation of ourselves, how we should invest in ourselves over anything else. Mm-hmm. Wonderful insight. So no, it's been on this podcast, Aggie, so thank you.
Okay, tell me then if you want to share a big mistake that you've made recently so we can avoid making the same mistake.
Big mistake recently. There's nothing that comes massively to mind, but what I will speak about vulnerably is be kind to yourself. And what I mean by that is I can be quite reactionary, quite impulsive. And that in and of itself isn't a problem, as I say, it's just a data point. But just give yourself permission to stay present more often. Because when I don't is when I make my mistakes. That's when I tend to go into assumption mode, Aggie, or maybe a judgmental mode, is when I'm not making decisions or having conversations from a place of presence.
Agreed. Thank you for that. Garry, we've talked about quite a diverse, lots of different diverse things. Is there anything you were hoping to talk about today and we completely missed?
Not at all, but no, not really. To be honest, it's been a beautiful exploration. If I'm allowed to, maybe I'll just give you a quick plug that I'm struggling my way through.
That was my next question, so go right ahead.
So I'm struggling to write my first book, Aggie, which is called Change is an Inside Job. So I'm halfway through it. And again, I talk a lot about the experience of my life so far, as I've shared with you kindly today on your platform. But what I've also managed to do is bring in 34 other human beings who are sharing their lived experience with me so that I can bring to life a personal development book that allows the reader to see themselves in the story. So it's not about me. It's not about the other reader. It's about it's not about the other contributors. It's about the reader seeing themselves in the story in the hope that by the end they realize they are good enough, they realize there's far more that they could and should be doing, and that actually change is indeed an inside job, and for them to stop tying their identity to things outside of them. So that's the synopsis, and hopefully that will come out at some point this millennium.
How can people connect with you and find out more about you, Garry?
Thank you very much for that. So I have my own website, which is garryturner.life, GARRYTURNER.life, LIFE. You can find me on LinkedIn, find me on Twitter at Garry IP Catalyst. And yeah, just reach out. I love talking to people, love connecting, love sharing content. And you kindly alluded earlier on regarding a summit that I put on, which was called the Have Courage Summit. That summit actually is being given away as part of, I'm giving that ebook away as part of another summit I'm on next week, which is around amplify diversity, equity and inclusion. And so just reach out. I love learning, love connecting, and yeah, it's just been an absolute joy to be with you, Aggie, and you hold space brilliantly. So thank you for today.
Likewise, Garry, it's been an absolute pleasure and a very inspiring conversation for me as well. And I hope the listener will think of the same thing. So thank you very much for that. And I wish you all the very best, really, with your book and everything else. Any last parting words?
No, just thanks to you and thanks to the listeners for joining us in this conversation. And just remember, you are enough. Start from there and everything else will flow.
Thank you for listening. Please take a moment to subscribe and review Personal Development Mastery on Apple Podcasts, and also share this podcast with someone who you think will benefit from it. If you want to gain access to exclusive content while supporting this podcast, then become my patron. The link is in the show notes, or you can type bit.ly/pdmpad. If you want to know more about what I do and how I can help you, or if you have any questions, join my Facebook group Personal Development Mastery. Again, the link is in the show notes, or you can simply type bit.ly/pdmgroup. And until next time, stand out, don't fit in.